In this video, I'm going to be talking about some of the earnings reports that I'll be watching in the next week. Now, today is April 15th on Sunday when I'm posting this video. So obviously tomorrow the 16th will be the first day of earnings reports, and there's honestly quite a few because earnings season is coming on right now. Last week, really the only ones I looked at, I didn't post a video about it for whatever reason, but the only ones that I really was concerned about or really looked at too much were there's just a couple financial banking stocks that had earnings reports, but that wasn't anything major. And there honestly aren't too many this week that I'm personally looking at, but there are a couple of big ones. But anyways, before I get in the video, if you haven't checked out my channel before, I talk about investing and the stock market. So if you're interested in anything like that, definitely head over onto my channel and consider subscribing. But other than that, getting onto the video, the first one that's actually coming out Monday, and it's probably the biggest one that I'm looking at, and probably one of the biggest ones in my portfolio that I pay attention to their earnings reports for a couple of reasons I'm going to talk about in a couple of seconds, is Netflix. Netflix, stock I've spoken pretty highly about, a stock that has consistently beaten almost all of its earnings reports in the past few years or so, and a stock that's up enormously high over the past 5 years and even the past year as well. I think Netflix is either the first or second highest moving stock in my portfolio as well, or by that I mean it's a stock I've made the most on in percentage wise, and actually I'm pretty sure total capital wise, because it's a relatively expensive stock as well. It's around like I can't remember the exact price, but I think it's around $300 right now. But anyways, Netflix, like I've said before, one of the biggest factors of its earnings reports that relates, pretty much almost directly correlates to its price increases is its user growth, because everything, sales, profits, every single factor that goes into Netflix, how much money they make, is pretty much factored into how much users they have, and especially not only how many users they have, but how much their user base is growing. And how Netflix breaks this down in their earnings reports, which I think is a bit broad, but they basically break it down into international and national, and which is national is just US growth, and then break it down to pretty much every other country they put into an international bracket, which I think is a little bit odd because Netflix isn't like available in every single country internationally. I know this when I've traveled internationally, even though it was a couple of years ago. I think things have changed by then, but Netflix, for whatever reason, puts it into these pretty relatively broad categories, and I think it would be a little bit better to like break it down more, but they don't necessarily do a good job of that. But anyways, Netflix, they basically crush their subscriber expectations every single quarter. If you look at this previous quarter, they were expected around 6 million total. Their actual international growth is at a lot higher number than their US growth, which I think it would be a good, I don't know if you really want to put a label on whether that's a good or bad thing, because obviously the US, holds a pretty small amount of the total world population. And if you look at countries like China, India, Japan, they have extremely high consumer growth. And so, that's probably a good thing to be expanding internationally. But their international was around like 5.5 million, and their US was around 6 million, and those expectations, I think they hit right around, according to marketwatch.com, they hit around 8 million users compared to that expectation of 6 million, which is a pretty significant increase. I mean, beating it by 2 million users is pretty significant, and that's, 2 million, 8 million, it's like 20-30%. That is a huge number. I think that's a really, really big deal in my opinion. And a lot of people, they've been saying this for the past year now, at least. They've been saying Netflix cannot beat this user growth. These expectations are way too high, yet every single quarter they seem to beat it. And, one thing to note about this up and coming quarter, usually the quarters in the beginning of the year, usually the fourth quarter is a whole lot better for especially companies in their specific industry, just because more people are spending money around that fourth quarter of the year, especially during Christmas time. But one thing to note too, they have a pretty large international population, and even though a lot of people in the US tend to not necessarily spend as much money during the first quarter or so, the first 4 months or so of the year, doesn't mean people in other countries aren't, because those people might not necessarily be spending a lot on Christmas or during the holidays. But I do expect them to beat expectations in terms of EPS and user growth, which once again I think will be the biggest determinant of how high their price keeps going, and really everything revolving around Netflix's business model. One other couple of things I'd really want to look at, I'm not necessarily worried about some pretty basic things that you look at for an earnings report, like profits, how many sales they're doing, stuff like that, mainly because their user growth is really focused around all that stuff. A couple things I do want to look at with them is, are they able to cut costs because of Netflix originals? I know they're getting rid of quite a few shows, and I don't know if that's actually going to impact their user growth or not. But even though they are getting rid of some of the more expensive, popular ones, I believe the main reasons for getting rid of those is because they can't renew contracts at the right prices, and a lot of these shows are also jumping to other platforms like Hulu, Amazon Video. So that is one thing that might hurt Netflix a little bit. And in 2019, or maybe possibly even late 2018, Disney is supposed to be coming out with their own movie streaming platform, as well as a lot of other businesses out there, including obviously Amazon and Hulu, are coming out with other streaming platforms. So that is one thing that might worry some people about Netflix, but I don't necessarily think that's a big deal right now. Anyways, moving on to some other stocks I'll be looking at their earnings reports on Monday. Really, the only other one is Bank of America, which I'm not going to be honestly, most of the rest of the ones for the rest of the week, I'm not going to be looking at too heavily, except for maybe one or two of them. But Bank of America is just a stock I own. I usually look at most of the stocks I own reporting quarterly earnings reports, unless it's like a stock that's just, a solid blue chip stock. I don't necessarily need to be paying attention to it too much unless, some article or report really, sticks out like crazy. But Bank of America, not going to be looking at it too much, but probably a little bit on Tuesday. Goldman Sachs and Johnson & Johnson. Once again, Bank of America, similar to Goldman Sachs, probably will only take a little bit of a look at it. Johnson & Johnson, blue chip stock, probably won't be looking too heavily into that one, but probably will pay attention to it a little bit. Wednesday, there actually aren't any that I will be looking at. Thursday is just KeyBank, ticker symbol KEY, which once again, another banking stock, probably a stock no one else cares about besides people, maybe me. It's just my personal bank. But Friday is Procter & Gamble and General Electrics. Procter & Gamble, won't really be looking too heavily on them. I have been thinking about picking up a couple shares of them, though, so if their price does drop in this next earnings report, definitely consider picking up a couple shares of them, and same with Johnson & Johnson, honestly. So, but the next one on Friday is General Electric, which is coming out with an earnings report, and I will definitely be looking at that one. But once again, that one's on Friday, so that's later in the week. There's a lot of things going on in General Electric right now. A lot of people are wondering how low can their price possibly go. I mean, it's dipped below $13. It's getting close to $11 range, and is it going to keep going lower? I think this earnings report, even though it's probably not a good idea if you're a long-term investor to look at one sole earnings report, but if you look at General Electric's past couple earnings reports, they have been very, very poor, and most people are guessing this one's probably not going to be very good either, even though they are taking some steps in the right direction in terms of liquidating certain parts of their business. Some of the parts they're liquidating, actually, I didn't actually understand why they were, but I thought they were pretty good parts. I just don't think they have the money to hold them up right now. Are they going to raise a dividend? Are they going to cut a dividend a little bit more? What are they going to do with that? I think a lot of big things will be coming out with General Electric's earnings reports at the end of the week, so I would definitely take a look at theirs. But anyways, the main two this week I'll be looking at is Netflix and GE, some other ones, like I said, mainly just banking stocks, actually. And I'll maybe take a look at Johnson & Johnson and Procter & Gamble. And if their prices dip a little bit at these earnings report, definitely go in on them. But I definitely expect Netflix to go up on this earnings report. So not saying you should try to play the earnings reports. I think that's very risky. But anyways, guys, thanks for watching the video. That's really it for today. It is earnings season, so I'm probably going to be cranking out some videos about individual stocks, about how their earnings reports are, and just really overall about what I think about them, if I own them, if I'm going to buy them, sell them, just basic stuff like that. So keep an eye out for that. Just, if you're part of the giveaway, I did let the winners know that they're part of it. 2 out of 3 have answered so far. So if you're that third person, definitely check your comment section. You didn't win it on the social media, you won it on the video. So check out the comment section to see if you won. But anyways, guys, I hope you enjoyed the video.